evening, everyone. Today's topic is on forgiveness. We see this on the screen. So before we begin our talk, I have a favor to ask, that every idea we have about forgiveness, everything we've been taught, perhaps leave it aside. Let us be open to changing our perspective. Because in chapter 14 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, St. Augustine, towards the end of the chapter, talks about looking at life differently, changing our perspective, not looking at life as this single life, but looking at life with many lives. Because in Spiritism, we believe that we live many lives, along with many other belief systems. In Buddhism and many other different belief systems, we believe we live many lives. So with this perspective, let's keep that in mind when we're talking about forgiveness, knowing that when we forgive, it's not just for today, but it's for the long run, that ultimately, because forgiveness is a divine law, it means that we have to adhere to it. We have to eventually forgive. And what comes to our mind is actually a story that recently was in the news this past year. Maybe some of you read it on Yahoo News, as I did, one morning. And it was a story of a young girl in her 20s. It's her bachelorette party. So you know all the festivities that go on with a young girl's bachelorette party. And one of these things, they were having a lot of fun by the pool. She was there with her bridesmaids, and they were playing around. And her best friend in this playing around pushed her into the pool. Well, the downside of that was that she went head first, broke her neck, and wound up paralyzed. And this was a couple of days before her wedding. And so we can imagine the stress of that for not only the girl who became paralyzed, but for the friend, her best friend, who did that to her. Can you imagine the guilt coming from the best friend, and also perhaps maybe the anger for the young girl who's now paralyzed? But instead of what perhaps maybe running through your mind, what happened, maybe the girl, it's no longer her friend. Maybe you think that she went to jail, whatever. It's not what happened. What happened was this. She forgave her best friend so much that when the story was released and she gave exclusive rights to a certain, I think it was ABC or CBS, to publish her story, they paid for her wedding and her honeymoon, but still she said, I will never disclose which one of my best friends did it, because she had multiple best friends who were at that party, that small bachelorette party. She never disclosed who it was, and she forgave her. She put out a statement that she, without a doubt, forgave her best friend, of course. It was an accident. She didn't do it intentionally, although here I am paralyzed. She did get married, by the way, but she's paralyzed now for the rest of her life, unless modern medicine within the next 20, 30 years comes up with something to reverse this. She's paralyzed for the rest of her life. So it's quite a story for us to reflect on, because to my knowledge, this girl's not Spiritist. I don't know what her background is at all, other than she had an opportunity to feel hurt, to feel like she wanted to get revenge, to feel a lot of emotions a lot of us feel when we take on this idea of I'm a victim, it happened to me, and then this is where forgiveness comes into play. Why is it important in our lives? Because perhaps maybe we think that forgiveness is not something tangible, it's something abstract, it's something far away. We don't think about applying it to our lives. But it's quite real, especially when we hear stories like this. It's quite empowering, I think, because we know, we learn with Spiritism, we learn within the Spirit's book, when we learn about the law of progress, we know that there are certain souls who are incarnate in this world who inspire us. We hear their story, and it empowers us to forgive others as well. Right? We have that. We have people in our lives that inspire us, for sure. Reflecting on forgiveness, there was a research done in 1999. It was published in this Journal of Peace Research. Perhaps you're not a research reader like I am. I like to read up about these things, but it was interesting in my research doing this talk, not only researching all the codification, all the adjunct literature, We also look to modern science. We look to modern day news, as Kardec did. He learned also to bring modern things. We see it in the Spiritist Review, the magazine that he published at his time. He brought modern day stories and linked it up with Spiritism. So we want to follow in Kardec's footsteps and do the same. So there's a research that was done. The work was called The Propensity to Forgive, Findings from Lebanon. And part of the research found this: lasting peace cannot be brought about between different communities who have fought each other for many centuries if the cycle of violence, the aggression revenge cycle, is not broken at some time. This cycle can be broken if the members of the different parties decide to do so and decide not only to negotiate, but also to forgive. So maybe you're thinking, how does this have anything to do with Spiritism? That's great that they did the research, wonderful. How does it relate? Let's relate it. In Spiritism, we believe in many lives, right? So over many centuries, we live many lives. So the idea here is that we are creatures of habit. And around us, we find we are reborn into the same familiar circles, the same family over and over again to learn how to forgive. So let's give an example of this. In the book Action and Reaction, there's a case, and it's the case of Marina. And in this case, this chapter is entitled Increased Debt. Why? Let's review her case. We've talked about her before, but she's so important to talk about and to review, because if you go and study her case, and these are the characters in her particular story. There's Louisa, her mom, Marina, who's the main character here, Zilda, and what would be George or Jorge, depending on how you pronounce that. And so we see in the book that she was living her fourth lifetime, her fourth incarnation to correct an issue from 3 lifetimes ago. She's in her 4th lifetime, about to commit the same error or another error, and again have to come back for a 5th time. Then there was a huge spiritual intervention because the mother had merit. But we see, as stated in the research, if we do not break the cycle, if we don't learn how to forgive, we have to come back. At some point in our lives, we have to address that issue. Okay, if you don't want to deal with it today, it's our prerogative. We have free will. Absolutely, we have free will. And the Gospel according to Spiritism talks about free will and divine will. Meaning what? Well, you can go and do as you please, but divine will always prevail overall. Something for us to reflect about when we think about cases like, because this is a real case. These are real cases that Andrea Louise brings for us. And they're amazing because you read these stories and it's like, wow, this is what happens. And they talk about in the book that her case is not uncommon. It happens to many and most of us. We come back lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And we were reflecting on this, how embarrassing in a way it is. Oh my gosh, this is my 20th lifetime. Why can't I get it right? It's almost a little bit embarrassing, at least for myself. I'll mention how many times, it's like repeating a grade, repeating the 5th grade or 9th grade over and over again. It's embarrassing after a while. All your friends know that you're repeating, although perhaps maybe we're not aware of how many lifetimes already, but it's something for us to reflect on. So already with the mentality, like we started out, we live many lives, so better to address the issues today. Spiritism teaches us that, right? And Jesus talked about in the Bible when he taught that one parable, the one saying where Jesus talks about bringing your gift to the altar, but you have to be reconciled first with your brother before bringing your gift and enjoying all the gifts of heaven. Spiritism talks about that. We have to first be reconciled with our brother, our sister, whomever, before we are able to ascend to a higher level of being. So how do we define forgiveness? I think I'm going to give Merriam-Webster a little bit of a break today because oftentimes we use her a lot, or him or her, the dictionary a lot. So today we're going to use the APA, or the American Psychological Association definition, because I liked it. We liked it. We thought it was good. No offense to Merriam-Webster's great dictionary. But they state that forgiveness is a process or the result of a process that involves a change in emotion and attitude regarding an offender. Most scholars view this an intentional and voluntary process driven by a deliberate decision to forgive. This process results in decreased motivation to retaliate or maintain estrangement from an offender despite their actions and requires letting go of negative emotions towards the offender. Today we opened up our meeting a message from Happy Life about willpower. This is so significant for us. Perhaps you don't see the word willpower anywhere in here, but it has to do with willpower. Because forgiveness involves main components, a change in our emotion and as well as in our attitude. There has to be a change within us that occurs, not just external. Oftentimes we think, well, if I move this external barrier, my life will be better. Well, once this changes, this will get better. It's a fallacy. It's an illusion that if you think that you're going to move something external, that all of a sudden things are going to get better. And there's a story. I don't know if any of you have ever heard this story. Sort of like a parable, but it's not one of Jesus' parables. It's a story where a man leaves a town, and as he wants to go from one town to another, in the middle of the road is this old woman sitting on a chair. And he approaches the woman thinking, oh, I'm going to ask her how the next town is, because he's leaving a town that he doesn't like. So he goes and approaches the woman, and he says, excuse me, old woman, can you tell me about the town over there that I want to walk towards? How is it? And the old woman says, well, tell me first about the town you just left. He says, oh, well, it's horrible. It's full of terrible people, and they're all snobs. And she says, well, unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell you that the other town is just like that. So, and he leaves and walks on his way. And a second man comes, also wanting to leave the previous town to go to the next town. And he approaches the same little old woman. He says, excuse me, little old woman, I want to inquire about the following town that I'm walking towards. And she says, well, son, before I tell you that, how was the town you just came from? And he said, oh, it was great. People were welcoming, they were jovial, they are great. I just need to move for a job or whatever. And she said, well, you'll have great enjoyment. The town that you're going to now is the same way. So the story is really interesting because you think, well, why did the old woman tell him two different stories? I mean, either it's great or it's not. But the point of the story is that our perspective, how we view life, is our reality. Our perspectives are our reality. That's why when we started this, we asked you to change your perspective. Don't look at life as just one life, but many lifetimes. And here, we talk about this change within us that needs to occur, the change in our emotion and our attitude. We need to change our perspective, the way we look at something. Because ultimately, we can't change certain things in our lives, right? Sometimes we can't change necessarily where we live, who we live with, our job situations, whatever it may be. Your neighbor who perhaps you don't like is offensive to, you can't change them. You can't change other people. You can only change your own inner perspective. And this is part of the definition. And we reflect further with Joanna Giangelis. Wonderful book, Existential Conflicts, recently published in English, and we have here for sale as well. The Spiritist perspective, because we know that we can never talk about a Spiritist topic without mentioning the spiritual influence in our lives. We would be negating and neglecting the talk for today if we didn't. So Joanna Giangelis brings to us this in chapter 5 of this book, and she says, the change of mental and emotional attitude breaks the bonds of obsessive suggestion, bringing more clarity to reasoning and freeing it from the executioner's dominant impulses. Strong words. What does that mean? Well, we know that we have spiritual influence in our lives, and that spirits, depending upon if we are mentally in their same vibration, can affect us ultimately. But if we change how we view things, change our thoughts, change our mind, our mental and emotional attitude, it breaks the link from their obsessive suggestions and also gives us clarity. It's a beautiful thing. And how does this tie into forgiveness? Well, sometimes we are such in a cyclic behavior for many lifetimes of not forgiving, of being rebellious, that we are unable to link our mind with this Christ consciousness, because learning to forgive is about linking our mind to Christ consciousness, but we can't link our mind to Christ consciousness if we're stuck in this cyclic negative thought patterns. We can't really go anywhere when we're stuck in these obsessive types of thoughts. So forgiveness according to Spiritism. What does Spiritism say about forgiveness? We've touched a little bit with Joanna. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 10, item 4, they say there's 2 ways of forgiving. One is great, noble, truly generous, without ulterior motives, delicately sparring the self-esteem and susceptibility of one's opponent, even when he or she is completely to blame. Perfect example, the story I told you. The young girl who did not, under any circumstances, want to reveal the best friend who left her paralyzed. I mean, people like to know those types of scandalous things, but not at all. If she was truly upset or truly wanted to be vengeful, she could have mentioned the girl, her name, even where she lived, or just her name. And we'll talk about that second type. But because her forgiveness was this, great, noble, and truly generous, and she didn't humiliate her friend for making her paralyzed, quite the opposite. She knew that her friend was very, very sorry and will probably hold that guilt for the rest of her life, unfortunately, or maybe not. But she knew her friend was truly sorry and there was an accident. She accepted it completely. So that is a perfect example of what Kardec brings to us. Exemplifies, it personifies this first part. And the second, by which the offended person, or the one who thinks he or she has been offended, imposes humiliating conditions on the other person and makes him or her feel the weight of a forgiveness that angers instead of pacifies. It's kind of funny when you think about this, when you think about married couples sometimes, sorry guys, sometimes the husband does something, but none of the husband's here. Sometimes the husband does something and the wife says, "Oh, I'll forgive you. As long as you take out the trash for the next month or 2 and you drive the kids to work every day and you let me sleep in and do all various types of things and perhaps even other things that make more humiliating to the husband. She'll only forgive you if you drop down on your knees and do something like that." Sometimes we put these stipulations on people we love. Sometimes it's not husband, wife. Sometimes it's your own best friend. You say, "Oh, I'm never going to forgive her. If I forgive her, then she has to really make it up to me." That's that kind of forgiveness. It's not a forgiveness that is truly generous, and it has ulterior motives. And it's a forgiveness that makes others angry. It doesn't pacify. It's not the kind of forgiveness we should cultivate, although it's quite often that this happens. I recommend you go read this chapter. It's all about forgiveness in chapter 10. It's very amazing. And the spirit Simon Simeon, is the spirit who gives the teachings at the end. It's very moving for us to reflect on. And further in this chapter, in item 10, I thought it was so relevant for us. We can even do this on a daily basis with anything, not just with forgiveness. It's one major step or a couple steps in our lives we can use to help forgive or even deal with anything in our lives. And it's this. They recommend this. It would be necessary to see oneself in a mirror, stepping outside of oneself somehow, and regarding oneself as another person and asking, what would I think if I saw someone else doing what I'm doing? Most assuredly, it is pride that leads people to disguise their own defects, moral and physical. So what are they proposing for us here? To change our perspective. Because too many times we get stuck at being angry and upset that we don't step outside of ourselves and really look at ourselves going, "Oh my gosh, do I really look like that?" I find it quite an interesting science project if any of you want to tape yourself throughout the day. I like these reality shows, although I don't watch them anymore, but I used to because I thought people who watch them later are pretty humiliated about how they're acting. And a lot of them say, "Oh my gosh, do I actually look like that?" We actually look really funny when we get angry, when we do things. We don't realize the impact of what we're doing. That's why this proposal by Kardec and the good spirits, as if you're looking at yourself in a mirror and you step out of yourself for a minute or longer and look at yourself St. Augustine, I believe it's question 999 of the Spirit's book, talks about this, about when you're looking at a situation and you want to look at it objectively, take the ego out, take the self out, take yourself out of the situation and look at it objectively. This is also great, you know what for? To protect yourself from obsession. Because oftentimes, one of the types of obsession, fascination, we don't see what's really going on. We're so blind. We have something that's analogous to beer goggles, except we're not drinking alcohol, which is rosy glasses we don't see. But if we're able to do this, this is great. Like I said, it's not just for forgiveness, but it does help for forgiveness. You can utilize this, what we would say, meditative process in your day-to-day life at any point, at anywhere, wherever you are, for reflections. And let's just go back. And what happened there? Yes. So, and we can use that. In question 886 of the Spirit's book, Kardec poses a question. What is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it? So maybe you're thinking, what does charity have to do with forgiveness? Everything. And the Spirit's answer, benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfection of others, and forgiveness of offenses. The best way for us to remember this is to remember this picture. Every time you're in your life, when you're at a point where someone offends you, hurts you, whatever of those emotions you may have, think about this and think about the acronym BIF. B-I-F. Benevolence, indulgence, forgiveness. That we have to forgive offenses of others, be benevolent, charitable towards them, and be indulgent. Because let's face it, none of us are perfect. None of us. Everyone, I think, probably knows that story of when that woman was, in Jesus' time, the woman was being stoned for being an adulterer, and the men were about to stone her, and he said, yet he who was without sin cast the first stone. And we apply that to modern times. And what does that mean for us? Before we throw the metaphoric stone at someone, look first at yourself. Are you perfect? Have you perfected every virtue? Do you exemplify and personify in your day-to-day life? Chances are, if you're still in this world, probably not. Probably not. That's not to say that when people do bad things that we should just sit up, take the shots at us, and not think twice about it. No, it doesn't say about that. We're not talking about that. But we're talking about being more understanding, more benevolent, and more forgiving. So if you remember nothing, remember this triangle, this little charity molecule, if you will. And remember that it's imperative part of this cycle, because if you only have benevolence, you also need indulgence and forgiveness. And who thinks of forgiveness as a charity? Most of us probably think, well, I gave $20 to Goodwill the other day, or I donate all my stuff. I wake up early Saturday morning. I donate my time at the soup kitchen down the street. I give my charity. Charity is not just almsgiving, as told by Kardec and other spirits in the Spiritist teachings. It's not just that. It's this also. Forgiveness, giving forgiveness, is not only charity for those who you give it to, it's also for yourself. Can you imagine the best friend of the girl who broke her neck and now is paralyzed? If she turned around and said, I'll never forgive you. I mean, her best friend's guilt is already so much so that she'll never be able to even probably move past it. She'll always see her best friend in a wheelchair. But the fact that her friend gave her this forgiveness, it's huge. It alleviates a lot off her, I'm sure, if we could reflect with these thoughts. And we also learn that in the Spirit's book, question 661, the question that's posed by Kardec, may one effectively ask God to forgive one's sins? And the Spirit's answer to us, God knows how to discern between good and evil. Prayer does not hide sins. Those who ask God to forgive their sins do not receive it unless they change their conduct. Good deeds are the best prayers, for deeds are worth more than words. So what are we learning thus far? Take-home messages thus far. We could say what? Forgiveness is a lot of work. 1. Personal work on my own emotions, my own inner world, this change in my conduct and my emotional state of mind, my perspective. It's a lot of work. But learning with the chapter in Gospel According to Spiritism that talks about patience, we learn that all work on ourselves that's more laborious is more meritorious, per Kardec. The more it takes to do something, the more it's worth it. There's that saying that things that come easy don't have much value. It has some truth to it. Because if it comes easy to you, well, it comes easy to everyone. But this is much more difficult to do. Forgiving others who have offended us. I mean, we always think it's for someone else. I mean, right now probably we're thinking, yeah, you know, I have this cousin of mine, she just can't let it go. If you already started out this talk tonight thinking about your cousin, Monica, your stepdad, your friend at work, it's not the correct perspective. We want to first think about ourselves, myself included, because I don't stand before you having a distance, having accomplished this myself. But Kardec teaches us that the good Spiritist is not one who's perfected it, not one who's perfected all the virtues, but is just the one who's always making the effort to achieve it. So God can never blame us, and I'm sure He doesn't when we're working on it. Perhaps our friends, people around us in our community may blame us and say, you're not working hard enough. But it's always ultimately, as Mother Teresa said, in the end, it's between me and God. And it makes sense. Because if your conscience is clear before you and God, that's all you really need to worry about, because lots of people cast stones. But truly the ultimate judge, as some people refer to, He is upstairs. And we know God doesn't judge us. He just waits diligently for us to be like that prodigal son, to come home, to realize that he was wrong, and to go and redo all the mistakes of the past. And as we study with the Gospel, again, chapter 10, item 10, I love this. This is great because this really shows us what it is. Because we saw the other molecule of indulgence here, and we think, okay, indulgence, yeah, how does that really affect, what does that really mean? And Kardec brings to us that indulgence teaches us that we must not judge others more severely than we judge ourselves, or condemn others for what we absolve in ourselves. Before blaming someone else's wrong, let us see if the same reproof might not fall upon us. What does that mean? Don't cast stones. Don't cast stones. Because probably we could guarantee either in some time after you cast that stone, something will arise to show you, now, you aren't that perfect now either, are you? Life in the universe will find a way to metaphorically bring us to our knees to reflect that, hey, none of us are perfect. We need to be more indulgent with others. We have to think, how would I like to feel? If I mess up big or small in my life, don't I want people to be more understanding with me? For us, sure we do. You know, when you go and mess up, you want people to be more understanding. As a mother or father would be saying, okay, yeah, that wasn't right, but it's okay. Today's a new day. Let's start over. Let's do something new. It doesn't help to ruminate and to continually think about the negative things we do in our lives. And that's what indulgence teaches us. To think first, and Joan Gianges in this same book, in Happy Life, she talks about same things, of course. Same things, that don't judge others. Be more severe first with yourself. And then once you begin to work more and more on yourself, then you realize how difficult it is to change. Oftentimes when we find ourselves judging a lot other people, it's because we haven't yet first done the work on ourselves. Because if we do, and when we do, we know that, man, oh man, it is so hard to change. We are creatures of habit. We continuously do the same thing. Every morning, I get up, I drink my mochaccino, I have my one donut, and I continue in this without even realizing that I'm doing it until something happens that breaks this cycle, this pattern of behavior. Then we realize, then we get upset. I break my leg, oh, I can't get up to get my mochaccino. We get a little bit upset. We're creatures of habit. We need to be more observant. Socrates says, know thyself. It's so important for it. Perhaps we take these words for granted. Perhaps we take this book for granted that it was brought to us. but it's very empowering. And that's what it does. Spiritism doesn't come and bring you your forgiveness and here, you don't have to worry about it. It's all done for you. No, it says, here are the tools. Give you my toolbox. Courage, friend, you can do it, but go and work. Go and work. And non solar, Andrea Louise, the mother of the spirit doctor, when he's first acclimating to the spirit world, and he comes to know that his mother's in a higher sphere, and he's like, oh, wow, I'm paraphrasing here. Oh, wow, Mom. Wow, that's great. You're in a higher sphere. How wonderful. And she says to him, look, son, don't think that I'm sitting up on a cloud here. The higher level elevated you are, the more work there is to be done. And Emmanuel referenced that in the book, I believe, in the domain of mediumship, I believe. Where Emmanuel says, if man knew that in the higher spheres there's more work, perhaps he wouldn't like it. And I paraphrase. It's things for us to reflect on. So to help us put all of this knowledge into practice, Stanford University did this long, laborious work on forgiveness all across many continents. US, Canada, all over Europe. Different researchers got together to find what are the steps of forgiveness. And they call this the Stanford Forgiveness Project's methodology, 9 steps to forgiveness. And they found that all throughout their research, this is what had helped people who were dealing with forgiveness across the board, whether it was small conflicts or really huge conflicts of sexual abuse, physical abuse, any type of offensive behavior, from the smallest to the biggest. They found in their research this helped. So let's reflect a little bit. First step, know exactly how you feel about what happened. Know exactly how you feel about what happened. And be able to articulate what about the situation is not okay. Then tell a trusted couple of people about your experience. But know how you feel about it first. Oftentimes we don't know our own emotions. We don't know how we feel about things. We just feel them. We don't call them a name. We don't say, well, I'm frustrated or I'm angry. Because sometimes through these reflections you realize, you know what? Wow, I've been angry for a while. Now that I think about it, we need to reflect more about it. And then either go and search for either a therapist. We have fraternal counseling at Spiritist centers throughout the U.S. and all across the globe that are not meant to replace any medical assistance, but can serve as an adjunct therapy. And number 2, make a commitment to yourself to do what you have to do to feel better. Forgiveness is for you and not for anyone else. It truly is a gift you give to yourself. Because how many years do you ruminate with these angry feelings? And perhaps we think, oh, forgiveness is really for those big things that happen, huge things. Big things are built with small building blocks. One little thing happens and we hold the anger, we don't address it. Another little thing happens after year, and one day, people explode. Thus is born things like Columbine in recent years, and other killings that have been happening. On top of other comorbidities that exist with these children, no judgments. We know that it's quite complex situations. We're not judging here. We're just reflecting of how things build over time if we don't learn how to address it. And make a commitment. This is where willpower comes in. You have to want it. Because if you don't want it, if you're just like, yeah, I should forgive. Yeah, I know Spiritism says that. I should. But yet, you don't really do anything. You just say, yeah, I know. I come to the center. I don't know if any of you have ever listened to that Brazilian Spiritist. We like to call him the comedian of Spiritism, and his name is José Medrado. It's very funny. And one of the things recently, I was listening to one of his talks, he reflected that he thought that after noticing over years, decades of certain people coming to the Spiritist Center, he thought, I don't really think they believe in Spiritism. I mean, they come and they participate, but man, they're exactly as they were 30 years ago when I first met them. They've done nothing to work on themselves. They're exactly the same. And it was more of a jovial, funny kind of way that he put it because he's Medrado. Medrado is very funny. If you listen to him, you can go on YouTube and he's quite funny. But it's quite true. Some of us love the ideals that Spiritism brings. It's very beautiful. In a perfect world, someday we forget it's now and here that we should apply it. We can wait, sure, absolutely. We can wait till later, but oftentimes the situations are much worse. Conditions for us are much worse. Now we have the luxury of our smartphones, iPhones, fast cars, fast internet. Who knows the situations we'll be put in if we don't take the opportunity today to deal with our issues with people that are close to us. Because next time, it's going to be much worse. Spiritism teaches us that in the different cases in Andrea Louise we learn about. Number 3, forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation with the person that hurt you or condoning of their action. What you are after is to find peace. Forgiveness can be defined as the peace and understanding that come from blaming that which has hurt you less, taking the life experience less personally, and changing your grievance story. What does that mean? That seems a little like, oh. What that means is you take what happened to you and you reframe it. Because ultimately, if we are victims of abuse, of whatever it is in our lives, we can't change it. It already happened. So it's best that we try to find a way to accept it. And how do we accept it? Because we can't forget. This idea of forgive and forget, really not possible. You can't forget. You don't forget, perhaps some of us don't forget, 12 years ago when that guy hit your car, your favorite car that you worked on. You don't forget about it. It stays in your mind. But what can happen is you reframe it. Let's give an example of this. For those of us who are parents, you teach your kids. You discipline them. And perhaps you discipline them in a way that they get upset, they yell, they scream, they cry, they don't like it. They say, you're the worst mommy or daddy in the world. And they slam their door and go to their room. And maybe this happens over a succession of many years. But then once they grow up, hopefully, they grow up one day and realize, you know, mom, dad, stepdad, stepmom, you know, you were pretty hard on me back then. But now I realize as an adult, I really needed that. That was really beneficial for me. Because at that age, what happened? He becomes an adult and he reframes it. Whereas some people hold these grudges for years and are unable to let go. So one of the therapies for this that they found in the research was that obviously no one, no matter what amount of money or what drug you give them, you cannot go back in time. I've not read any research yet that anyone has created a time machine. If you do, let me know. I will buy a ticket. But it doesn't exist. So, best thing to do, find another way. Find another way. And over again, the different research that's coming out now talks about this new popular word, reframing, which means looking at it from a different perspective. 4, recognize your primary distress is coming from the hurt feelings, thoughts, and physical upset you are suffering now, not what offended you or hurt you 2 minutes or 10 years ago. Recognize your feelings. Recognizing why you feel, recognizing what it is you feel, these hurt feelings and thoughts. We have to first, as earlier we discussed, recognition of what it is exactly we're feeling. 5, at the moment you feel upset, practice a simple stress management technique to soothe your body's fight or flight mechanism. Perhaps some of us don't know that fight or flight. It's an automated system, and we could say, in our body. It's a defense mechanism that when something happens, you know, for instance, when 9/11 happened, a lot of people took off. I mean, recently, sad to say, most recently in India, it was, I want to say maybe 400 or 500 people died in a hospital fire because the nurses, the doctors, hospital personnel, instead of helping the patients that were stuck in their bed to get out, they all fled and left the patients in the hospital to die. Fight or flight. They chose flight. So they propose, in order to, because it's an automatic system in our body. We know this. You go take any biology class on anatomy and physiology 101 and you learn this fight or flight mechanism that exists for all of us. So we're saying, and Spiritism teaches us also, wait, be patient before you make a decision. Joanna Gian just talks about this in Happy Life. In the book I mentioned earlier, Existential Conflicts, and she says, never make a decision out of strong emotion, because you will regret it later, whether it's strong happiness or strong sadness. Stop and reflect first. That's why they found this research. Find something to de-stress before you make a decision, and you'll regret it later. 6, give up expecting things from other people or your life that they do not choose to give you. Recognize the unenforceable rules you have for your health or how you or other people must behave. Remind yourself that you can hope for health, love, peace, and prosperity and work hard to get them. We can't change people. We can't. How many women marry men and they have this even subconsciously in their mind? I'm going to change him. Don't worry. I'm going to change him with time, with a lot of love. I'll change him. Bad thought process. Bad thought process. A, because it's not fair to your partner, because ideally you should accept them as they are from the get-go, from the jump start. But it's an illusion we have to change other people. It won't happen. So what can we do? Change ourselves first. Change ourselves first and work on ourselves. And truly, by working on ourselves, it inspires other people. We think about the story of Paul and Stephen in that book, which we have for sale here. Phenomenal book. And we learn that the Apostle Paul, in the story, was quite inspired by Stephen after he got over the hating part. He was quite inspired by him because he saw, wow, no matter what happens, Stephen's happy. Stephen's steady. He has this inner peace that I've never had my whole life studying Jewish law. He came to a point, Paul, in his life, he said, you know what? I want that. I want that peace for myself. So he inspired. He affected a change in Paul because we affect one another in our lives. Number 7, put your energy into looking for another way to get your positive goals met than through the experience that has hurt you. Instead of mentally replaying your hurt, seek out new ways to get what you want. We know that we can never go back and change what has already happened. It's a false idea, it's an illusion. So if we, again, reframe, think about this. Don't go back mentally replaying the hurt that happened, but try and find new ways. We can't forget all the hurt that has happened to us in our lives. What we can do is create more positive in our lives. You know, the Spiritist talks about without charity there is no salvation, because it is through that charity that we have for others and ourselves that we replace all the negative with the positive. Number 8, remember that a life well lived is the best revenge. Instead of focusing on your wounded feelings and thereby giving the person who caused you pain power over you, learn to look for the love, beauty, and kindness around you. Forgiveness is about personal power. And we know that Spiritism teaches us the same. It's about empowerment for ourselves. It is. We can see it. We can feel it. We can taste it when we do our studies. That it's all truly, it's all up to you. It's all up to us to effect a change in our lives. And to learn to look for the love, beauty, and kindness around you. And if we could create a pill for forgiveness, if there was a way, it would have been created. But if we could be a little bit funny and create a pill, we probably would, but we can't. Instead, this imaginary pill must be the working on ourselves, going inside of ourselves and meditating, as Joanne de Angelis talks about in the similar book, Reflecting on Ourselves. And number 9 of these steps, amend your grievance story to remind you of the heroic choice to forgive. Reframing it. Too many times we find ourselves when we're in a hurt situation of telling the story over and over again. How many times we met someone in our lives who is our friend, they share with us a really horrible story, and 15, 20 years later we meet them and they're still telling the same story with the same exact hurt. It's sad. We should be compassionate for them because they don't have the strong enough willpower to come out of it yet. Because there will come a day where we will find the courage when we truly want it in our willpower. It's not easy. That's why in the charity molecule we have to have benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness, because it's not easy. It's not. But if there were a pill, how many of us would buy it? The forgiveness pill. Whatever dosage it was, even for something small, would we buy it? Probably. Probably look like that, and probably be called Forgivenol. But I bet if we could make it here at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore, we could market it, and it'd be great. But ultimately, it is about our inner transformation. Unfortunately, guys, I'm sorry. It is work. But we know it's courageous work because so much good comes out of it. You feel a whole lot freer. So these are the take-home messages, that through great work and great effort, we can achieve great things. I will open up for a few minutes if anyone has any questions, comments, if you want. Yeah, let's go.
Great talk. In that first story that you told us about that accident, I want to reflect on the person that caused the accident, how she could forgive herself, which is a very difficult task. Because if she forgave herself so quickly or truly, people outside would think, well, she didn't take seriously what she did. So the society has this tendency to blame forever the one and be very kind to the victim. So that's a very difficult thing, you know, when a mother that accidentally caused the injury or even the death of her child, how she's going to forgive herself. Because the society is the first to blame her of irresponsibility or lack of responsibility. So it has to have some pills for this, for the person that caused the thing, because it's very difficult. I think, in my case, it works when of course, I didn't commit such a strong thing, so it's easier, because it's little things. But I think it's the best way, because we cannot change our past, what we did. The best way is to do something good, so that act will result in something good, and that act of the present will soon be part of now my past memory. So my memory collection now is changing the quality. I will have other good things to remember, and not only that bad incident. So that's a trick that works for me. So I have to put an effort to do something good immediately if it's possible. It doesn't need to be in the same line, but it has to result in something good, so I will feel proud of myself. I have something now in my memory collection, something good that I may be proud of, and not only that bad incident that I'm feeling guilt of. I want you to talk a little bit more in this other person.
Sure. It's really interesting, because what comes to mind when you speak about that is we don't always know the whole story. And we hear a story in TV, perhaps we hear stories in our own personal lives, and we think that we know the whole story, but we never know the whole story, because there's always a spiritual side that we don't see. There was a case of Chico Xavier and a mother who came to see him. She wasn't Spiritist, as most of the people probably came to see Chico, they weren't Spiritists in the beginning. She had recently lost her 5-year-old son. It was her only child, and she was quite distressed, but she wanted to come to Chico. She was hoping to get a message. So, and this is displayed in the movie As Mães de Chico Xavier, I think is the name, The Mothers of Chico Xavier. So, yeah, As Cartas, yeah. So one of the stories, which is an actual story of this woman who went to see Chico, And she's waiting for Shiko to enter. And when Shiko greets her, she says, "Hi, Shiko," and all these things. And immediately, of course, Shiko, being the sensible medium that he is, already probably knew, could read her like a book, and said to her, "Did you forgive the babysitter?" So let's, before I even tell you the response that Shiko gave her, let's go back. Her 5-year-old son was riding on a bike with the babysitter. He fell down and hit his head. He cried, and then he seemed okay. They brought him to the ER. He seemed fine, brought him back home. Okay. 2 days later, he was in excruciating pain, had a very bad headache, brought him back to the hospital. They found he had something called a subdural hematoma, which is basically a bleeding on the brain, and he died very soon thereafter. And it really was because he was riding on the back seat with the babysitter. So when the woman comes to Shiko and greets him, and the first thing he says to her is, he says, "Did you forgive the babysitter? Or did you thank the babysitter?" And she said, "Shiko, I forgave her, but why would I thank the babysitter?" And those of us who are watching the movie, we think, yeah, Shiko, why would she thank the babysitter? Because she basically was the instrument. And he said, because if it were you who was riding the bicycle and killed your son, you would not have been able to forgive yourself. So thank the babysitter for being the one to carry that burden for the rest of her life, and not you. And that is like paralyzing for any mother to hear that, because she didn't think about that. She didn't think about the guilt probably of the babysitter was going through her mind, being the hand that, was there when he died. And Shiko said to her, he had to go either way. She was merely the instrument. If it wasn't going to be through that, it's going to be through something else. That was his reincarnatory plan. And that's part of the forgiveness process we have issues with. We do not accept these issues in our lives. We talk about forgiving others, but also the guilt for the offender is also, if the offender acknowledges that they did something wrong, because maybe they don't, but if they do, guilt is a very strong thing. Very strong thing. And if we don't learn how to deal with guilt appropriately, Joanna Giannis in this book, Existential Conflicts, talks about how in the process, when remorse and guilt begins to play out in our minds, if we don't learn to accept it and say, okay, I did wrong, let me go and do better. If we stay in the loop, if we can call it a loop, because it becomes a mental theme that plays over and over again, that you never fully accept that you did wrong. You just stay in this mode of feeling bad all the time. Oh my God, what did I do? You never forgive yourself. So if you are the offender, or if someone accuses you of being an offender, it's noteworthy and worthwhile for us to reflect, perhaps I am. Perhaps what I did wasn't intentional, as the girl who pushed her best friend. It wasn't her intention to break her neck, but she did. Sometimes we hurt people without realizing, so it's noteworthy for us to be humble, which is one of the Christ-conscious first ones we talked about this particular month, or a couple months before, in November. It's noteworthy for us to be humble, acknowledge what we did, and do better. Because in Spiritism, and Joanna Giannis talks about, when we truly are sorry for the wrong that we have done, we're doing better. In our lives, we're already acting better. That is the true sign of someone who is truly sorry. Joanna Giannis, in this book, Existential Conflicts, there's a chapter entitled Guilt, and she says that the offender, when they are truly sorry, begins to repair things in his life. When he's not, he stays in a loop. But thank you, Yaska, so much for those reflections. We do appreciate them. And if no one has any other thoughts or questions, we will pass to the other part of our meeting today. No one else does? Daniel has a comment? Yes, thank you, Daniel. Absolutely, the ultimate example for forgiveness was Jesus, because as he laid there, hanging on the cross, famous words that he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Ultimate example. When people were yelling at him, saying, "You're the Christ, come down off that cross." He could have, absolutely. He could do whatever he wanted to do. He's the governor of this world. But that's not the point. Jesus, being the wise governor, always took every opportunity to teach us things. Thank you, Daniel, for that comment. It's very true. So without any further comments, we will pass to our second part of our evening with the passes.